In the golden glow of Graceful Redemption Church, a peaceful Sunday morning shatters into chaos when a woman's desperate voice pierces the air and gunshots ring out. As faith collides with fury, secrets unravel, forever altering the lives of those within its sacred walls. Stay with me as we unravel the real truth. Welcome to Fatal Affairs, a channel solely focused on bringing daily told and untold crime cases on love, betrayal, and revenge. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your unwavering support, and please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for future updates. We would really appreciate that. The sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows of Graceful Redemption Pentecostal Church, bathing the entire sanctuary in a soft, golden glow. The congregation, a community bound by faith, swayed to the rhythm of the lively gospel music. Their voices harmonized, echoing the joy of worship as they lifted their hearts in unison. The atmosphere was serene, a typical Sunday morning filled with hope and devotion. It was a peaceful scene, a scene that could easily have been mistaken for any other in this tight-knit church nestled in the heart of Atlanta. At the altar stood Pastor Benjamin Atkins, his tall, commanding figure drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. He exuded a magnetic charisma, the kind that naturally made people listen when he spoke. With his Bible open before him, his voice prepared to carry the words of wisdom that had inspired countless lives. The congregation, entranced by his presence, leaned in with anticipation for the sermon he was about to deliver. His message was always powerful, each word carefully chosen, each story shared for its depth and impact. Little did anyone know, this Sunday morning service would soon become something far more sinister, an event that would mark a dramatic shift in the lives of everyone present. As Pastor Benjamin began to speak, the heavy doors at the back of the church suddenly crashed open. The sound of the doors slamming against the walls shattered the peaceful atmosphere like thunderclaps in a storm. A woman's voice, raw and filled with a mix of anger and desperation, sliced through the music with startling intensity. "Benjamin, you can't ignore us anymore." The room went silent in an instant. Gasps of shock rippled through the congregation. Framed in the doorway, standing like a figure from a nightmare, was Sophia Johnson. Her eyes were wide, burning with a fury that sent chills through the crowd. In her trembling hands, she gripped a gun. It was a stark contrast to the peaceful image of worship just moments before. Her presence was enough to freeze the entire congregation in place. There was no mistaking the danger that she represented. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, the unmistakable sound of gunshots rang out, sharp and horrifying. 3 shots echoing through the church like a death knell. The congregation was thrown into utter chaos. Pastor Benjamin, once a figure of unshakable strength and purpose, was knocked back by the force of the bullets. His crisp white shirt, so meticulously pressed, was now stained with the vivid red of his own blood. He staggered backward, falling to the ground, a look of disbelief crossing his face as his life slowly ebbed away. In the midst of the horror, Olivia, his wife, screamed in anguish. Her heart-wrenching cry was filled with raw pain, a sound that would linger in the memories of those who witnessed it, haunting them for years to come. As panic erupted throughout the sanctuary, no one seemed to fully comprehend what was unfolding. Questions raced through their minds, questions that no one could answer. How had they gotten here? How had this beautiful church, this place of refuge, become a scene of violence? How had this ordinary Sunday service turned into a nightmare they could never have imagined? The shock was overwhelming. All eyes turned toward the altar, where Sophia stood, trembling and consumed by emotion. The gun was still gripped tightly in her hand, her anger now directed toward the man she had once known. She had come for him, and there was no turning back. As her gaze met that of Pastor Benjamin, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt, betrayal, and fury. The weight of everything she had endured, the years of secrecy, the lies, the promises broken, had culminated in this single moment. And now, she was ready to make sure everyone knew the truth. Benjamin Atkins hadn't always been destined to stand at the pulpit of Graceful Redemption Pentecostal Church. In fact, the path he would eventually take was a far cry from the life of service and leadership he came to know. His early years were spent in the rough neighborhoods of South Atlanta, where hardship was a constant companion. Growing up, he witnessed more than his fair share of violence and despair. Like many of his peers, he flirted with trouble, caught up in a world of petty crime and reckless behavior. His teenage years were marked by fleeting thrills, the kind that came with a fast life and dangerous friends. But despite the rough exterior and the bravado he carried, there was always something different about Benjamin, a spark, a glimmer of something more. It was his grandmother, Mama Hester, who first recognized it. A woman of deep faith, she had seen the potential in her grandson long before he could ever see it himself. She was a pillar in the local church community, someone who prayed tirelessly for her family and never gave up on Benjamin. "Boy," she would say to him with a stern gaze, "the Lord's got plans for you. You just have to open your eyes and see it." For years, those words went unheeded. Benjamin dismissed them as nothing more than the well-meaning ramblings of an elderly woman. His life was already set in motion, and he saw no reason to change course. But everything shifted one fateful night. It was a night that would change the trajectory of his life forever. Benjamin had narrowly escaped a drive-by shooting, an event that claimed the life of his closest friend. As he knelt in the blood-soaked streets, cradling his best friend in his arms, something within him clicked. There, in the stillness of the night, he felt a presence. He felt a calling, one that was unmistakable, something larger than himself. It was in that moment, amidst the chaos and heartbreak, that Benjamin realized he had a choice. He could continue down the path of destruction, or he could change his life forever. The very next Sunday, in a move that shocked his family and friends, Benjamin walked into church for the first time in years. He sat quietly in the back pew, tears streaming down his face as the pastor spoke of redemption, of second chances. It was a message he needed to hear, one that resonated deep within his soul. From that day forward, Benjamin's life was never the same. He threw himself into studying the Bible with the same fervor and intensity he had once reserved for the streets. The skills he had honed, his natural charm, his ability to speak with passion, were now used to draw people to the Word. His testimony, once a story of reckless youth, became a beacon of hope for others who were struggling to find their way. It wasn't long before he was leading youth groups and giving guest sermons. By the time he was 25, Benjamin had completed his theological studies and was ordained as a minister. His rise through the ranks of the church was nothing short of remarkable. His sermons, filled with raw emotion and insight, resonated deeply with his congregation. He had the rare gift of making ancient scripture feel alive and relevant to the struggles of modern life. His energy was boundless, his commitment to community outreach unwavering. At 30, Benjamin founded Graceful Redemption Pentecostal Church. It started humbly, with just a handful of followers meeting in a rented storefront. But the church quickly grew, and within 5 years, it had become one of the most vibrant and fastest-growing congregations in Atlanta. The new building, with its soaring ceilings and state-of-the-art facilities, was a testament to his vision. Pastor Benjamin Atkins had become a name known far and wide. His sermons were broadcast on local radio stations, and his social media presence grew by the day. He was a regular at community events, always offering a kind word or a helping hand to those in need. To the outside world, he was the epitome of a modern religious leader, dynamic, relatable, and deeply committed to his flock. His life was a shining example of what it meant to walk in faith. But behind the polished exterior, behind the sermons and the praise, there was a secret that threatened to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build, a secret that would come crashing down in a way no one could have ever anticipated. The woman who held the secret to Pastor Benjamin Atkins' downfall was not someone he was supposed to want. In fact, Sophia Johnson was everything he had worked so hard to avoid: fierce, unpredictable, and with a temper that could ignite at the slightest provocation. She was the complete opposite of the calm, controlled figure he had cultivated as a public figure, the ideal image of a man of God. Yet despite the glaring differences in their personalities, there was an undeniable force that drew them together, a magnetic pull that neither could resist, no matter how much they tried to fight it. Their paths first crossed in a community center, where Benjamin volunteered to mentor at-risk youth. It was there that Sophia, who had come to pick up her younger brother, first laid eyes on him. She was a woman on a mission, storming into the center with all the fiery energy of someone who was used to getting what she wanted. She had been kept waiting, and her temper flared as she made her way through the building, ready to confront whoever was responsible. But when her eyes met Benjamin's, something shifted. For a moment, time seemed to slow, and the world around them disappeared. Benjamin was immediately drawn to her. He was still a few years away from founding his church, and at the time, his focus had been on building a reputation and growing his influence. But something about Sophia's raw energy and unapologetic nature intrigued him. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, fierce and unrestrained, yet there was something beneath the surface that piqued his curiosity. Sophia, in turn, couldn't help but notice the calm strength that emanated from him. He exuded a sense of purpose and peace that was foreign to her, and it stirred something deep inside her. Their connection, though unlikely, was instant. What began as a spark quickly turned into an inferno. They spent hours together, talking about life, dreams, and everything in between. Sophia found herself drawn to Benjamin's unwavering sense of calm, while he was captivated by her energy and passion. For a time, it felt like the perfect balance. Benjamin convinced himself that she was exactly what he needed to keep him grounded. She reminded him of the world he had left behind, the gritty streets he had grown up on. In Sophia, he saw a piece of the past he had tried to escape, and perhaps a chance to reconnect with it. But as their relationship deepened, the cracks began to show. What had seemed thrilling and spontaneous at first quickly became exhausting. Sophia's temper, once an exciting spark, began to burn out of control. She became possessive, prone to outbursts of jealousy that left Benjamin constantly walking on eggshells. He found himself trying to justify the bruises and scratches he would sometimes cover up, making excuses to his concerned friends. But despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to end it. There was a vulnerability in Sophia that resonated with him, a need for love and acceptance that mirrored his own. He told himself that with enough patience, enough understanding, she would change. But that hope began to erode as their relationship grew more volatile. The moment that would mark a permanent shift in their lives came one night after a particularly heated argument. Sophia stormed out of Benjamin's apartment, furious and determined. Hours later, he received a call that would change everything. Sophia had been in a car accident. Thankfully, she was alive, but there was more, much more. Sophia was pregnant. The news hit Benjamin like a thunderbolt. The weight of it crushed him in an instant. A baby. His baby. He could feel the gravity of the situation, pulling him into a spiral of confusion and fear. All his carefully laid plans, the future he had imagined, seemed to crumble before his eyes. He knew deep down that he couldn't marry Sophia. Her erratic behavior, her unpredictable temper, it was no environment in which to raise a child. But he also knew that abandoning his child was not an option. In the days that followed, Benjamin made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. He would support Sophia and their child, financially and in any way he could, but he would keep them separate from his public life. He couldn't risk losing everything he had worked for, the ministry, the congregation, the life he had built. So he created a divide, one that would become the foundation of a lie that would eventually destroy him. As Sophia's pregnancy progressed, Benjamin's rise in the church continued. He poured all his energy into Graceful Redemption, continuing to build the ministry and its outreach programs. His public image as the dynamic, charismatic leader only grew stronger. But privately, he struggled with the weight of his secret, the growing guilt that threatened to consume him. He kept Sophia and their child hidden, meeting with them only in the shadows, always looking over his shoulder. Sophia, for her part, was caught in a cycle of anger and hope. She wanted more time with Benjamin, more recognition, more acknowledgement of the family they had created. But to him she was the past, a past he couldn't afford to embrace in public. The birth of their daughter, Zoe, only complicated matters further. Holding his daughter for the first time, Benjamin was moved beyond words. But even in that moment of tenderness, his resolve was solidified. He couldn't let his past mistakes derail everything he had worked for, everything he believed he was doing for the church and his community. And so the pattern continued. Pastor Benjamin Atkins lived two lives, one in the public eye as the respected and revered leader of Graceful Redemption, and another in the shadows as a secret father to a child he could never fully acknowledge. Sophia, left to raise their daughter alone, watched from the sidelines, caught in a web of resentment, dependence, and unfulfilled promises. Benjamin's world was beginning to crumble, but it would take someone unexpected to bring everything into the light. Benjamin Atkins had created the perfect life, or at least he thought he had. He had built Graceful Redemption from the ground up, pouring his heart and soul into the ministry that had grown under his leadership. His sermons, filled with passion and wisdom, resonated with the congregation, and the church had become a beacon of hope for many in the community. The once small congregation had blossomed into a thriving institution, and Benjamin was seen as a modern-day spiritual leader, a man of faith who had overcome his troubled past to guide others toward redemption. But no one, not even the devoted members of his congregation, knew the truth. No one knew about Sophia Johnson, the woman he had tried so desperately to forget. No one knew about Zoe, the daughter he had been hiding for years. And yet, despite the guilt that gnawed at him every day, he kept the secret buried deep, convinced that it was the only way to protect everything he had worked for. Olivia Green, the woman who would become his wife, was the perfect partner for the man Benjamin wanted to be. Where Sophia was fiery and unpredictable, Olivia was calm and steady, a soft-spoken woman with a serene presence that had an almost healing effect on everyone she met. She embodied the kind of partner Benjamin believed he needed, someone who could balance his intensity and bring peace into his life. Their first meeting had been at a regional church conference, where Benjamin was a guest speaker. Olivia, a devoted member of her own church, had been immediately drawn to him. His words seemed to speak directly to her heart, igniting a passion for service and purpose that had always been simmering beneath the surface. To her, Benjamin represented everything she had ever hoped for in a man: a leader, a spiritual guide, someone who had overcome the hardships of his past to become a beacon of light in a dark world. For Benjamin, Olivia represented the life he had convinced himself he deserved. Her unwavering faith, gentle spirit, and genuine desire to serve others aligned perfectly with the image he had carefully cultivated as the leader of Graceful Redemption. She was the kind of woman who could stand beside him as his equal and help him fulfill the grand vision he had for the church. He fell in love with her, not just for her beauty and kindness, but because she seemed to embody the very ideals he wanted to project to the world. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of shared prayers, long conversations about faith, and dreams of building a powerful ministry together. Olivia believed, wholeheartedly, that she had found the man of her dreams, someone who shared her values, her commitment to service, and her passion for helping others. She never suspected that there were secrets lurking in the shadows, that Benjamin had already built a life before her, one he had been trying to erase, one that would soon come crashing down on both of them. For Benjamin, the guilt began to creep in as their relationship deepened. He knew that he should come clean to Olivia about his past, about Sophia and Zoe, but fear held him back. Fear of losing everything he had worked so hard to build: the church, the ministry, the perfect life he had created with Olivia. So he kept his secret locked away, convincing himself that it would be okay. After all, he was doing God's work, and he truly believed that he could change, that he could be the man he thought Olivia deserved. Their wedding day was nothing short of magical. It was a grand event, held in the heart of Graceful Redemption Church, packed with friends, family, and members of the congregation. Benjamin and Olivia exchanged vows, standing before God and their community, a picture of Christian love and devotion. To everyone in the church, they were the perfect couple, the ideal model of a pastor and his wife. Olivia, overjoyed by the union, threw herself into her new role. She became an active presence in the church, starting new outreach programs, counseling young couples, and becoming beloved by the congregation. Her gentle nature complemented Benjamin's dynamic preaching style, and together, they were seen as a power couple in the truest sense. The church flourished under their leadership, and their influence spread far beyond the walls of Graceful Redemption. But even as they basked in the glow of their perfect life, there was a storm brewing, one that had been years in the making. Benjamin's secret was a ticking time bomb, one that threatened to unravel everything he had built, everything he had worked for. Sophia, from the shadows, watched as the man she loved built a life with another woman. Her anger and resentment grew, fed by the years of broken promises and hidden truths. She wanted more acknowledgement, more recognition, more of Benjamin's time, and she was willing to do whatever it took to force him to face the consequences of his actions. Olivia, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit, continued to support her husband in all his endeavors. She noticed occasional moments of distraction, brief flickers of worry on his face, but attributed them to the stress of managing a growing congregation. She couldn't fathom that the man she had married was keeping such a monumental secret from her. But the pressure was building, and Benjamin could feel it. The guilt, the fear, the constant balancing act between his public life and the hidden life he had tried so desperately to leave behind. It was starting to take its toll. His behavior became increasingly erratic. He canceled meetings at the last minute, disappeared for hours without explanation, and snapped at church staff over minor issues. The congregation began to notice, and whispers of concern spread through the church like wildfire. Olivia, ever the devoted wife, tried to smooth things over. She ran interference, making excuses for his behavior, reassuring everyone that he was just under stress, but even she couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. Benjamin's demeanor had changed. He was no longer the man who had once spoken with such conviction and passion. Instead, he seemed hollow, lost in his own web of lies and guilt. As the anniversary celebration of Graceful Redemption approached, the cracks in Benjamin's facade were becoming impossible to ignore. The anniversary was supposed to be a time of joy and celebration, a reflection of all the good that had come from their hard work. But for Benjamin, it was just another reminder of the life he had built on a foundation of lies. And then, in a moment that would change everything, the secret came to light in the most violent and public way possible. As Graceful Redemption Church prepared for its 5th anniversary celebration, excitement buzzed through the air. The church was abuzz with anticipation as the congregation, along with invited guests, eagerly awaited the festivities. The atmosphere was festive, the kind of celebration that was meant to be joyful and filled with gratitude. But Benjamin, the man at the center of it all, was nowhere near as joyful as the crowd. For him, the weight of the upcoming day was overwhelming. He had spent weeks avoiding his responsibilities, dodging questions, and pushing his guilt further and further into the background. The anniversary was supposed to be a moment of triumph, a celebration of all they had accomplished, of the growing influence of Graceful Redemption, of the lives that had been touched by his ministry. But for Benjamin, it felt like the beginning of the end. Behind the polished exterior, everything was falling apart. His marriage to Olivia was now a fragile shell, held together by a thin layer of denial. The truth, which he had hidden for so long, was on the verge of being exposed in the most devastating way possible. He had no more control over the situation, and with each passing day, he felt his carefully crafted life slipping further from his grasp. Olivia, ever the supportive wife, threw herself into the planning of the anniversary celebration. She organized volunteers, arranged guest speakers, and coordinated every detail to ensure that the event would go smoothly. Her dedication to the church and her husband was unwavering. But beneath the surface, Olivia was struggling. She had seen the signs, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the moments of distance between her and Benjamin. She had asked him if everything was all right, and he had assured her that it was just the pressure of running a growing ministry. But deep down, she knew there was more to the story. She could feel it. The morning of the anniversary arrived, and everything was set. The church was filled with people, the air thick with excitement and chatter. But Benjamin couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his stomach, the weight of the lies that he had carried for so long. He had hoped, even prayed, that he could make it through the day without the truth coming out. But he knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Olivia found him in his study just before the service began. She knocked softly, her face a mask of concern, but her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Benjamin, is everything okay? You've been acting strange. You seem distant." Benjamin, his face pale and haggard from the sleepless nights, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice strained. "It's just a lot of pressure today. The anniversary, the celebration, I want everything to be perfect for you, for the church." Olivia wasn't convinced, but she nodded, her worry deepening. She could see that something was off, but she didn't know what. "We're in this together," she said softly. "Whatever is weighing on you, we'll get through it together." He nodded, but the words felt hollow in his ears. He had spent years building this life, this reputation, but he was no longer sure if he was worthy of it. And deep down, he knew that the truth was going to shatter everything: his marriage, his ministry, his standing in the community. As the service began, Benjamin stepped onto the stage, trying to mask the turmoil inside him. His hands gripped the pulpit, his gaze scanning the congregation. They were all here to see him, Benjamin Atkins, the charismatic leader, the man of God they had come to admire. But as he looked out at the sea of faces, all he could see was the lie he had been living. The guilt pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't escape. He opened his Bible, began to speak, but his words felt empty. He spoke of faith, of hope, of redemption, topics he once believed in with all his heart. But now they felt like distant echoes, as though someone else was speaking through him. As he spoke, he couldn't shake the image of Sophia's face, the rage and pain that had been so apparent when she had confronted him. He thought of Zoe, their daughter, the child he had kept hidden for so long. And then he thought of Olivia, the woman who had stood by him, trusting him with her love and her faith. Halfway through his sermon, as he was building to what should have been the crescendo of his message, the doors at the back of the church burst open with a violent bang. Every head turned, gasps rising from the congregation. And there, framed in the doorway, stood Sophia Johnson. Her eyes were wild, her face twisted with rage. She held a gun in her hand, her knuckles white as she gripped it tightly. A small child, Zoe, stood beside her, looking confused and frightened by the chaos unfolding around her. Sophia's voice rang out, raw and broken. No more lies. No more hiding. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Benjamin stood frozen at the pulpit, his heart racing, his mind a blur. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't move. All he could do was stare at the woman who had once been a part of his life, the woman he had tried to forget, and the daughter he had kept a secret. Olivia, sitting in the front row, looked from Sophia to Benjamin, her face drained of color. Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her. The truth was no longer something they could hide from. Sophia, her gun raised, took slow, deliberate steps down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Benjamin. "You think you can keep us hidden forever?" she spat, her voice full of venom. "You think you can build your perfect life while we rot in the shadows? No more. It's time everyone knew the truth." Benjamin, his mind racing, finally found his voice. "Sophia, please. Please, think about what you're doing. Think about Zoe. This isn't the way to solve anything." At the mention of her daughter's name, Sophia's face twisted in fury. "Don't you dare use her name. You've denied her for years, kept her hidden like she was some shameful secret." The congregation watched in stunned silence, some frozen with fear, others scrambling for the exits. Sophia continued, her voice shaking with a mixture of pain and anger. "This is his daughter," she shouted, pulling Zoe closer. "The child he's been hiding from all of you, from his wife, from the church." Benjamin stood there, a lump in his throat. The weight of his deception was unbearable, and in that moment he knew there was no more hiding, no more lies. The truth had come to the surface, and it was impossible to deny. "I have a daughter," Benjamin said, his voice shaky but firm. "I've been living a lie. I've deceived all of you. I've deceived my wife, and I'm sorry. I can't hide from the truth any longer." For a brief moment, the room was silent. But then, Sophia raised the gun again, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Sorry isn't enough," she spat, her voice breaking. "You had your chance, Benjamin. Now it's too late." The air was thick with tension. The congregation held their breath, waiting for the inevitable. Then, before anyone could move, Sophia fired. The deafening sound of gunfire reverberated through the church, followed by a sickening silence that hung heavily in the air. Everything seemed to freeze in that moment. Time stretched out as the congregation collectively held its breath. Sophia's face was set with a grim determination as the gun trembled in her hand, the smoke still rising from the barrel. Benjamin, once the confident and charismatic leader of Graceful Redemption, staggered backward, his body jerking as the first bullet tore through him. The impact was immediate and devastating, sending him crashing to the ground in a heap, his blood staining the white shirt he had so carefully donned just hours before. The sight of her husband crumpling in front of her was too much for Olivia. She screamed, the sound of it raw and heartbreaking, as she lunged forward, her arms outstretched in an instinctive, desperate attempt to shield him. But Sophia was relentless, her gaze fixed on Benjamin, her heart filled with anger and pain that had built up over the years. The second shot rang out, and then a third, each one striking Benjamin with brutal force. His body hit the floor with a heavy thud, and the church erupted into chaos. Olivia was at his side instantly, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands against the growing pool of blood. "Benjamin, stay with me. Please stay with me," she cried, her voice breaking. But there was no response. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the moment suffocating her. The man she loved, the man she had built a life with, was lying on the floor in front of her, his life slipping away with each passing second. As Olivia tried desperately to keep him conscious, the world around her seemed to crumble. The congregation, once united in faith and worship, now found themselves scattered in a frenzy of fear and confusion. Some ran for the exits, some froze in terror, unable to process what had just occurred. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, but for Olivia, the world had become a blur of blood, pain, and disbelief. In the midst of the chaos, Sophia stood frozen, the gun still in her hand, her face pale as she looked down at Benjamin. The weight of what she had just done was beginning to settle in, and for the first time, doubt crept into her heart. She hadn't intended for this to happen, hadn't meant to pull the trigger, but the years of betrayal, the years of being hidden in the shadows had pushed her to the breaking point. She had wanted to make him face the truth, to make him acknowledge her and their daughter, but now, standing over him, she realized that nothing could undo the damage that had been done. "I just wanted you to love us," she whispered, her voice breaking, but there was no one to hear her words. The church was filled with the sounds of chaos and horror, but Benjamin's world had fallen silent. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, rushing to stabilize Benjamin as he was rushed to the hospital. Olivia never left his side, her clothes stained with his blood as she clung to him, praying for a miracle. She could hardly believe what had just happened. The man she had married, the man she had trusted, was now fighting for his life in a hospital bed, and the woman who had once been a part of his life, Sophia, was in police custody, charged with attempted murder. The media descended on Graceful Redemption like a storm, cameras flashing as reporters camped outside the hospital and church, eager to piece together the scandal. Headlines screamed of the shooting, of the pastor's double life, and of the woman who had brought it all crashing down. For Olivia, the public scrutiny was almost unbearable. She had gone from being the admired wife of a respected pastor to the object of pity and judgment. People whispered about her behind her back, questioning how she could have been so blind to the secrets Benjamin had kept from her. Despite the public humiliation, Olivia remained steadfast. She refused to let the scandal define her. She visited Benjamin every day, even as his condition remained critical. She struggled with the betrayal, with the questions of whether their marriage could survive this, but she was determined to see it through. She had never imagined her life would turn out this way, but as the days turned into weeks, Olivia found herself becoming the pillar of strength she had never thought she could be. Meanwhile, Sophia was left to face the consequences of her actions. She was taken into custody, and her story was splashed across every news outlet in Atlanta. Some saw her as a villain, an angry, scorned woman who resorted to violence in a fit of jealousy and rage. But to others, her story struck a chord. She was a woman betrayed and abandoned, pushed to the brink by years of lies and broken promises. No one could truly understand the depth of her pain, the years of being kept in the dark, of trying to survive while the man she loved built a new life without her. As for Zoe, the innocent child caught in the middle of it all, she was taken into protective custody. Social services worked to locate her closest relatives, but the situation was complicated by the sudden public revelation of her parentage. The little girl was confused, frightened, and missing her mother terribly, unable to comprehend the full extent of what had happened. For Graceful Redemption, the church that had once stood as a beacon of faith and hope, the future was uncertain. The congregation was shaken to its core. The police had cordoned off the church, treating it as a crime scene, while the members of the church were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered faith. For years they had followed Pastor Benjamin with unwavering devotion, but now the truth had come to light in a way that no one could have predicted. As the months passed, the echoes of that violent Sunday faded, though the scars it left behind would take much longer to heal. Benjamin, however, still at the hospital, was showing signs of little improvement. He clung to life with a determination that surprised even his doctors. Olivia, ever the devoted wife, remained by his side, her heart heavy with the weight of betrayal, but still tethered to the man she had once loved. She tried to reconcile the man who lay in the hospital bed with the person he had been, the person she had thought he was, and in doing so, she found herself on an unexpected journey of her own. Every day she wrestled with questions of forgiveness, of trust, and of what their future could look like, if there even was one. Benjamin had torn their world apart with his lies, and now, faced with the consequences of his actions, she wasn't sure if there was anything left of the man she had married. But as she sat beside him in his sterile hospital room, she came to realize that forgiveness wasn't about making everything right. It was about freeing herself from the weight of anger and grief. She didn't know if she could forgive him entirely, but she knew that she couldn't keep carrying the burden of resentment. Benjamin, too, was facing his own demons. He had survived the physical trauma, But his soul, once so certain, so driven, was now fractured. The lies that had built his life, the carefully constructed image he had presented to the world, had crumbled beyond repair. His once charismatic presence was gone, replaced by a man broken by the consequences of his choices. He knew there was no going back, no way to undo the harm he had caused. As he lay in that hospital bed, his confession came slowly but resolutely. "I've hurt you, Olivia. I know I've hurt everyone. I've lied, I've betrayed the people who trusted me, and most of all, I've hurt you and Zoe. I'm so sorry for all of it. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart." Olivia met his gaze, her eyes filled with the weariness of someone who had spent too long searching for answers. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Benjamin. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. But I need you to understand that everything you've done has consequences. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. For Zoe, for me." She couldn't bring herself to say more, but in the silence that followed, Benjamin understood that there was no easy way forward. Their marriage, their life together, it had been built on a foundation of lies, and it would take more than apologies to rebuild it. Meanwhile, Sophia, who had triggered the tragic turn of events, was facing her own reckoning. She had acted out of anger, desperation, and a desire to force Benjamin to face the truth. But the cost of her actions, of pulling that trigger, was more than she could have ever anticipated. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Her trial was a media frenzy, with reporters clamoring to capture every detail of the scandalous events that had unfolded. The court found Sophia guilty of attempted murder, and she was sentenced to 19 years in prison. As she stood before the judge, her face was a mask of regret, her spirit broken. The woman who had once been consumed by rage and revenge was now stripped of her defiance, left to face the consequences of her choices. The years of betrayal and broken promises had led her to this moment, and while it couldn't undo the harm she had caused, Sophia began to understand that her actions had irrevocably changed her life and the lives of everyone around her. In prison, Sophia struggled with the weight of her actions. The time in solitary confinement gave her space to reflect, to come to terms with the pain she had caused. She realized, slowly, that the violence she had resorted to could never be justified, and she began to question the years of anger that had driven her to the edge. She worked with fellow inmates, learning about the cycles of abuse and trauma that had shaped her life. Though her past was tainted with violence, Sophia started to find purpose in helping others who had been through similar experiences. Back in the outside world, Zoe, the innocent child caught in the crossfire, was finally settling into her new life. After being placed in the care of Angela, Benjamin's sister, Zoe found stability. Angela offered a loving, safe home, one that allowed Zoe to heal and find a sense of normalcy. The memories of her early childhood, of her mother's anger and her father's lies, began to fade, replaced by the warmth of a family who cared for her. Zoe eventually chose to work in social services, driven by a desire to help others who, like her, had faced trauma and uncertainty at an early age. As for Graceful Redemption Church, it too began the long process of recovery. The members who remained worked to rebuild not only the physical space, but the community that had once thrived under Pastor Benjamin's leadership. The trust that had been shattered would take time to repair, but the church's mission of serving others and living with integrity became the foundation upon which the church was rebuilt. Olivia, though still healing, became the figurehead of this revival, and slowly but surely, Graceful Redemption began to find its purpose again. However, despite all the rebuilding, the truth remained inescapable. Benjamin's health deteriorated in the following months, as his body, weakened by the years of deception and guilt, finally gave out. One quiet night, while Olivia sat by his side, his heart stopped. Benjamin Atkins passed away in the hospital, his life cut short by the very choices that had defined him. Olivia, though devastated by the loss of the man she had once loved, felt a sense of finality. Benjamin had been given the chance to repent, to face the truth before his death, and in a strange way, that offered her a kind of closure. She was left to rebuild her own life, not as a pastor's wife, but as a woman who had found strength in herself, a woman who had faced unimaginable pain and had come out the other side stronger. As the years passed, Sophia's time in prison stretched on, and while she would never be able to undo the harm she had caused, the time served allowed her the space to change. She worked to atone for her past by advocating for others who had suffered from the same cycle of pain and betrayal. Though she would never be free from the consequences of her actions, Sophia found a sense of peace in knowing that perhaps she could help others avoid the mistakes she had made. Olivia, now a community leader in her own right, continued her work at Hope Restoration, a place where she helped others rebuild their lives, just as she had done with her own. Zoe, now an adult, worked with children who had been affected by violence, trauma, and broken families. And as for Sophia, her journey of redemption continued, one step at a time, in the confines of the prison walls she had been sentenced to for 19 long years. The story of Graceful Redemption Church, of Benjamin and Olivia, of Sophia and Zoe, was one of devastation, but also one of survival. It was a story of fall and redemption, of broken trust and rebuilt faith. And at its heart was the simple truth that no matter how far one falls, there is always a way back. It might not be easy and it might not be quick, but with time, truth, and the courage to face the consequences of one's actions, healing is possible. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you found this story insightful, please subscribe and leave us a like. We would really appreciate that.